What kind of docs are you participating in?
God, like tons of like things with Al Jazeera and with More Perfect Union, and just lots of YouTubers, and something with Alex Gibney.
Oh, nice.
And Laura Poitras was just my interlocutor for a gig in New York, and we're talking about doing something.
Who's that?
Laura Poitras. She made Citizen 4.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Is Citizen 4 the Edward Snowden one?
Yeah, that's right. Won the Academy Award.
That is one of the best documentaries I've ever seen.
She's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, to capture that stuff as it was happening.
And he approached her because of her track record. Like, she had made a series of extremely brave, risky documentaries documenting U.S. War crimes in Iraq and Syria, and she'd been shelled and published whistleblower reports and so on. So Ed chose her because of who she was and what she could do. Yeah,
it's a very flattering portrait of Snowden as well.
I think so. Well, I think it was a sincere one too. I think she felt that way about him. I don't think it was access journalism. I think she
Oh, that's a good term. I haven't heard that. That's like where you just kind of are nicer to the person because they were nice to you.
That's right.
His girlfriend, soldier.
No,
not an actual soldier, but
right.
like a soldier in the metaphorical sense.
Yes, that's right. I thought you might be thinking of Chelsea Manning or something. No, yeah, his girlfriend's a Zumba instructor, not a soldier at all. Yeah. Wife now. They've got 2 kids.
Really? And so where does he live?
Moscow.
And he lives at the embassy, or
no, not the embassy. Jesus Christ, no. No, that was the
other Assange.
Yeah. No, Ed. So what happened was Ed got on the plane to Moscow with a connecting ticket to Ecuador, where he'd been offered asylum, and John Kerry, who was Secretary of State, didn't know he was in the air and canceled his passport, and he got stuck in Russia. He couldn't leave. He was there for 10 days, and then they gave him a provisional visa and eventually became a citizen. He can't leave the country because he needs a passport, right? He was a citizen of nowhere. And so Ed has repeatedly said he would come back to America, but he wants an open trial and he wants to be able to offer whistleblower defense. And they've said, no, you'll be tried in secret and you cannot offer like a conscience-based defense. So he's willing to go to a supermax for the rest of his life, but he wants to present a defense.
And how does the government justify wanting to do a secret trial?
They say it's military, right? It's FISA, it's the Foreign Intelligence Secrecy Act, right? They say it's a military tribunal, it's secret, it's national security. And this is what happened with his predecessor, Mark Klein, who was our client at EFF. He was the AT&T whistleblower who came into our offices one day and said, my bosses had me build a secret room in our Folsom Street switching center where our main fiber trunk goes through, and I put a beam splitter in the trunk, and we made a copy of the internet for the NSA. And here's the documents that I brought with me when I quit. And so we sued the NSA on behalf of a whole bunch of people they spied on, and they just used secrecy to stop us from presenting our case. Eventually the case was dismissed because we couldn't present our evidence, because they said it was a national secrecy matter, even though the secrets we were talking about had been in the New York Times. They said they couldn't be presented in court because they were still classified.
Wow.
I still work at EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Okay.
Yeah, we are Mark's lawyers, not Ed's, but we have Ed sits on a board of an organization spun out of us called the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and we've represented a lot of cases related to what Ed has published, so when journalists have been attacked for publishing it and so on.
Why don't you let your books be on Audible?
Amazon, which owns Audible, has built Audible into a monopoly. It's 90% of the audiobook market. And Audible requires that every book sold on the platform be locked to Amazon with a kind of encryption called digital rights management. And that means that if you buy my book on Amazon, on Audible, you can never take it with you if you leave Audible. And when a supplier like Audible has control over your relationship with your customer, they can treat you badly and you can't leave because your customer can't leave. And we've seen this with Audible. Audible last year was involved in a scandal called Audiblegate, where they stole at least $100 million from independent Audible authors. And those authors mostly stuck around because if they leave Audible, their listeners can't take their collections to wherever it is they go. And so this is obviously nonsense. This is bad for suppliers like me, writers. It's bad for listeners, audience members. And as a matter of principle, I won't do it.
So it hurt your bottom line?
Oh, significantly. My agent told me that we would have paid off the house and my daughter would have a fully funded Ivy League education if I had taken money from Audible.
Yeah, I just respect that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to live my principles. I didn't end up on the breadline, obviously, right? But you know, I could have had a more comfortable and secure existence if I didn't live my principles.
Do you feel conflicted about that? Like, was that a hard decision for you to make?
No. Look, when you make up your mind to be a writer and have a career in the arts, you're already deciding that you're going to do something that will pay you less to give you more satisfaction. I don't know a single writer who's at all successful who couldn't make more doing something else.
How much of like the themes and meaning in your books do you think is intentional, and how much is just subconscious?
Literary critics are really good at figuring out stuff that writers don't know about their work. I think that writers don't know what they're doing.
I found the character of Martin to be like a very decent guy.
Yeah.
And so is the character aspirational for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, every protagonist is aspirational for writers, and every character reflects something about the writers. So like no one in the entire history of the human species has ever known what anyone else was thinking, ever, right? We all are trapped inside the bone prison of our brains, right? And so the only person whose interiority any writer can have any access to, by definition, is themselves. So every character in every book is filtered through the writer's own self-perception. They have to be, because there's no one else whose self-perception you've ever been privy to, or I've ever been privy to, or anyone ever in the entire history of our species. No one has ever been privy to anyone else's self-perception. So when I write a villain, it's like, what would I do if I were a villain? It has to be, because it can't be anything else.
But what I mean is that Martin seems like a good, solid guy.
He is a good, solid guy.
And so when you write that, are you hoping that you'll help others be a good, solid guy, or help yourself be a more good, solid guy?
There's probably something to that. As you may have encountered, my fiction can be a little didactic, right? It's got messages.
You're explaining stuff.
I'm explaining stuff, and like that's my thing. I'm an activist. My activism involves a lot of explaining stuff, so that's the thing. But you know, I think that my novels.
When you go into your novel, are you thinking of that stuff before the character?
So here's what I'm thinking. A novel is a work of art, and a work of art, in the formal sense. I'm not saying like it's, oh, this novel's so good it's a work of art. I just mean novels are artworks. And the point of an artwork is to take something complicated and numinous and irreducible out of the head of the writer or the artist, put it into some external medium, and then have an audience member encounter that external medium and then reproduce some version of that feeling the artist had in their own mind. And
in the BEZZLE, when you're talking about like the prison system, you're trying to tap into the anger you felt when you learned about the privatization.
100%, right? So you know,
and that worked. And the parts that you
you
picked about prison, like the way that they were like upcharging all these people to stay in communication, and the way they got rid of any other way that they could hang out.
Yeah,
that was painful.
And it's real. And so a lot of the complicated, irreducible feelings that I have in my head relate to being furious about things in the world, and so that's why so much of that is in my work.
So in art, what are some examples that you've found of really good didactic art? That might not be the right phrase. I'm talking about what are your favorite versions of art, like, that are trying to disseminate?
Picasso's Guernica, 1984, everything by Octavia Butler, everything by Ursula K. Le Guin, even Heinlein, whose politics I disagree with. I think especially in his early works.
And those are all pretty different from one another too.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like the Guernica in 1984, very unique from, like the Guernica is so, I mean, by virtue of being a painting too, it's not.
Sure, of course.
The ideas aren't as sophisticated.
And Picasso was an abstract painter and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and I don't think he was an innately political person either, right? That was kind of his first foray into that.
No, but Guernica was very political.
Yeah. What's your favorite fictional depiction of finance?
Well, if you want to count The Big Short, I'd say The Big Short. I think that's a super good narrative film about finance. Putting Margot Robbie in the bathtub.
That movie?
Yeah.
That movie sucked.
Chacun son goût.
Very bad movie.
Well, Takes all kinds to make a world. Be a boring world. We all thought the same thing about everything.
I thought it had no respect for its audience.
Really?
Yeah. I thought he really treated us like we're dumber than him.
When he explained like collateralized debt obligations
Yeah,
with Margot Robbie in the
totally.
bathtub? I don't know. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it...
If you can't make it compelling within the structure of the movie and you have to do like this like outside scene that doesn't even work in a narrative, to me that's not elegant and not good storytelling.
See, I think there's a point... So this is interesting. I think that the idea that you should show and not tell is actually wrong. And I think that what it is it's a shortcut. That when you find a piece of work that doesn't work for you, like an artistic work that doesn't work for you, like a novel or whatever, you don't know why it doesn't work. You might think you do. You might go, oh, it's really boring right here. You should make the scene shorter or more exciting. And really what it might be is that the character set up 5 chapters before has not been drawn finely enough so that the intrinsic tension in the scene is close enough. Now, some things are hard to do well, and didacticism or exposition are hard to do well. And so you get a piece of work and it doesn't work for you. And what you do is you go through a checklist of things that are hard to do well, and you say, oh, well, there was this like expositional chunk, and so you should make that dramatic, right? Not because exposition is bad. It's because exposition is hard, right? So like in the same way you bring your
So you think people avoid exposition because they don't actually know how to explain it?
Because exposition is hard to make interesting.
Yeah.
But it's not because exposition can't be interesting.
No, exposition is interesting.
Yeah, some of the best stuff out there. And I thought the Margot Robbie exposition scene was great. I thought it worked on so many levels. I thought it was great, as an explanation.
I mean, I guess if you like to like look down on your audience and be like, oh, look, we found a cute way to...
It was like CDO, so like...
To educate idiots.
No, I think that the actual like formal definition of a CDO that she introduces is very good. And I think that like...
But there was a lot of places where you could get that explanation.
But I think that what they were doing is making a countersink to the finance sector's strategy. It's called MIGO, My Eyes Glaze Over, where you wrap a subject in so much performative bullshit.
Okay, so you think they were trying to do a commentary on like all the sophisticated drivel that gets thrown at us.
That's right. And so they're like, oh, well, they think that they think that like they can hand you a prospectus that's thick enough that you go, pile of shit this big must have a pony under it somewhere. I'm just going to like take it as read. And they're going, all right, well, if we need to make it super interesting, let's stick Margot Robbie in a bathtub.
Do you think you're smarter than me?
I don't know. I don't know what smart means.
It's okay if you do.
Look, I think...
Because your eyes, they darted.
I think I probably read more books than you.
Why do you think Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg got so buff?
Because they got a lot of money and they discovered that they still weren't happy. I think that they're just like chasing something, as we all do, right? I think the pathologies of billionaires are just the pathologies of normal people, but they do more damage.
How do you define freedom?
How do I define like personal freedom?
Sure.
Yeah, it's the...
Yes.
I would say freedom is closely related to self-actualization. It's the right to determine as to the greatest extent possible how you live your life. And the problem with a focus on just freedom is that if all you care about is your own freedom, then you end up taking away someone else's. Like, I have more freedom if I can boss you around, right? Because then I don't have to do whatever it is you want me to do, or you need. I don't have to take account of you. So
I feel that very acutely in my relationships.
Yeah, I think we all do. I think we all acknowledge that life would be a lot easier if other people would just shut the hell up and do what we ask them to do or tell them to do.
What is capitalism?
Capitalism is the system that says the most important priority we have is the profits that people get from investing capital, to the exclusion of the wages that people get from working capital and the rents that people get from owning assets.
Is that how a capitalist would define it?
No, I think a capitalist would say the free market. And I think the problem with that is that most capitalists literally don't know what the free market is.
What do you think is the greatest virtue to have in capitalism?
I think the greatest virtue in capitalism is referees, right? It's the idea that if you think that what makes capitalism great is the energy and dynamism of competition, you have to acknowledge that most people would rather just rest on their laurels than compete. And there comes a point where it's cheaper to bribe the ref than it is to get out on the field. And so if you want to have a vigorous market, you need vigorous referees. And I've said before, capitalists don't know what the free market is. When Adam Smith talked about a free market, he meant a market free from rents. He meant a market where someone who owned an asset couldn't stop the productive use of that asset. So a lot of people say that they want free markets and they want small government. And if you want small government and you want those markets to be free, then you have to make sure that the referee is more powerful than the companies. And if the companies get too big, then the government has to be bigger to keep them honest.
What are the best arguments against socialism?
The best argument against socialism is the coordination problem, right? It's this idea that the market can serve as a giant computer that is taking all the bids and puts, right? Like how much I'm willing to spend on things, how much I'm willing to sell things for, and just automatically creating these allocations, right? Something is scarce, people rush in, they make more of it, the price falls, you find out what this is. And there's this idea that knowing all that stuff a priori is really hard, and so it's just hard to do the math. I think that's overstated. I think it's really overstated. I think when you look at how internal economies like Walmart work, Walmart's like the same order of magnitude scale as the Soviet Union was in like 1990, and it's a socialist state, right? Like Walmart managers aren't bidding on shelf space, right? It's a command economy. The commissar of Walmart decides what goes on what shelf and where.
What is money?
You wanted a short answer?
Yes, as succinct as possible.
Money is a thing that can't be described in short answers. There's my short answer.
It's any kind of like symbol or item that society gives representative value to for commerce.
See, I think that's totally wrong. I think, so formally money is like a unit of account, store of value, and a unit of exchange, right? That's what we use it for.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
What it is, like what makes a thing money, is not our consensus that it's money. What makes a thing money is that you have a liability that can only be settled with it. You have a non-discretionary liability that can only be settled with it. So the thing that makes dollars money is that the IRS will put you in prison unless you give them some dollars every year. And that is so money started, the first coin money we have did not start with like farmers trading cows for chickens and not being able to make change. It's nonsense. There's no evidence that that ever happened. The only stories we know about coin money, and it's happened more than once, is you have an empire, it conquers a distant land, the farmers are subjugated, and the soldiers need to be fed. And the emperor needs a way to get the farmers to give food to the soldiers. And so what the emperor does is pays the soldiers in coin and taxes the farmers in coin. And he says to the farmers, every year you have to pay your tax in coin, and if you can't, we'll burn down your farm. And all of a sudden the farmers are willing to sell their food to the soldiers. And everyone is willing to accept coin because they know that the farmers need it, and they know that they'll need it to pay their own taxes.
What would we use if we didn't have money?
So societies that don't have money have not barter, but they have like collective ownership systems. So there's a whole lot of these, including some pretty sophisticated large ones where you have like, usually it's a sort of a council that controls access to or allocates access to certain resources. There's still some trading at the periphery, but like the things that matter are just controlled, and that's the case.
What are
for
the
a lot
things
of our
that
resources.
matter?
Oh, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs: food, shelter.
What level are you at?
I'm definitely at self-actualization. I'm a middle-class white guy living in an affluent part of Southern California. To say otherwise would be wildly disingenuous.
No, good.
But I just want to go back to money. So the thing that makes it money is that if you don't have it, someone will hurt you, right? Someone will do something bad to you. And so, or you can't get something that you absolutely want or need. So a Starbucks voucher is not money, but if you're stuck on an overnight layover at LAX and you can't get out because they've closed the security checkpoints for the night, and the Starbucks is not accepting cash or credit card because their machine is dead, and the only thing they'll accept is Starbucks vouchers, and anyone who wants to eat anything in the airport that night needs a Starbucks voucher, the Starbucks voucher is money, but only until the sun rises and they reopen the checkpoint. That's what makes that money. So you have a non-discretionary liability that can only be settled with a token. What's interesting about this is that Starbucks doesn't need your vouchers to make the coffee. And the point that I'm trying to get at here is the government doesn't need your taxes to fund programs. When you pay federal taxes, they do not pile up your money and then spend it on programs. This idea that we're spending taxpayer dollars on programs, it's not true. When you pay money as just like a formal order of accounting operations, you give some money to your bank has an account at the Federal Reserve, the Reserve sends the money to the Treasury, and the Treasury marks the account. And they say, that money no longer exists. You've remitted your taxes, we've just annihilated that money. The same way that when you redeem a Starbucks gift voucher, the Starbucks doesn't hold the gift voucher to give the next
so what's
person
actually
buys.
paying for the programs?
They type new money into existence when Congress authorizes the spending.
So what are they doing with the money they get from us?
Well, it's mostly digital. So they're just typing new zeros or erasing zeros in the spreadsheet.
Right, so it's just kind of existing nowhere for a while?
It's a ledger. Yeah, it's just a ledger. Money is spent into existence for federal programs, and it's taxed out of existence for
But is the amount of money
taxes.
they print relative to how much they get from us?
No, and it doesn't have to be. The thing that they need to worry about is getting into a bidding war with us, right? So
when people talk about things like inflation happening...
So that can happen, but not because of too much money. It happens because of too little stuff. So if the government says, okay, we're going to buy 1 million tons of steel, and all America has is 1 million tons of steel. Suddenly, the private sector and the public sector, every use of steel, they're bidding against each other. This is why during World War II, when the government really was buying 1 million tons of steel, they said, nobody is allowed to have steel except defense
So inflation is only the
plans.
result of scarce materials.
Yeah, and so one of the things governments can spend money on is making materials less scarce, right? They can build mines, they can build mills, they can build recycling plants. So those things are not inflationary because those things actually increase the pool of goods for sale in US dollars.
Right.
Right? So it's not money that does this, it's stuff. We have to keep our eyes on the stuff, not the money. And so it's entirely possible for governments to spend too much money, but it doesn't mean that when governments spend more money than they take in, they're spending too much
What
money.
are the top 5 things we should be keeping? What's the top 5 stuff we should be keeping an eye on? How much of it there is?
So the first one is human capital. We should be educating people. We should be feeding people. We should be housing people because not only.
No, I mean the stuff that's going to drive inflation.
So that's what I mean. So people who are unable to work, people who are unable to live, people who are unable to eat, cost the rest of us an enormous amount, right? It's a huge drag on our economy. So we should be investing in that. So for example, if we think about where there's a bidding war between the public and the private sector and where there's never going to be a bidding war, anyone who's unemployed, by definition, no one from the private sector is bidding on their labor. Mm-hmm. The government could spend as much money into existence as it would take to guarantee everyone who wanted a job, right?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be inflationary in the sense that all of those unemployed people are not, bidding, are being bid against. Their labor isn't being bid for by the private sector. So this is why when you see things like jobs guarantees and people say, oh, well, it'll be inflationary. That's not inflationary. That's a hugely positive thing. But, if you want to talk about materials that matter from a civil engineering perspective, there's only 2. It's concrete and aluminum. The energy budget for concrete, the energy budget for aluminum, you add them together, or the energy budget for every other kind of material is effectively a rounding error.
And we've got plenty?
No, we're short on both. Concrete's really energy intensive to make and very carbon intensive because you have to heat it to make the concrete. And then same with aluminum. Smelting aluminum is really expensive. Okay. That's why homeless people pick up cans. Because aluminum is one of those materials that is so expensive that even America will invest in recycling it because it would be insane to just put it in a landfill.
Back where I'm from in San Clemente, they were complaining about the homeless situation. They had stats on it. There was 10 homeless people.
Jesus. Yeah.
Well, they had a super right-wing guy up there who's like, oh, we gotta get him out.
Constantine Anthony is our mayor now, although he's running for commissioner. And we've effectively got universal housing for homeless people now in Burbank. We have subsidized housing, we have mental care, and we have long-term health care for people who are homeless. And there's virtually eliminated homelessness in Burbank.
Yeah, so why hasn't that idea been adopted by Los Angeles at large?
I don't know. It was really successful in Salt Lake City, Housing First. It's called Housing First. And it's this idea that so there's this kind of punitive idea that if you have people who are struggling with addiction or mental illness, that they have to sort that out before you give them a home. And this is nuts, right? Because resolving your mental health and addiction problems while you're living in a tent is a lot harder than while you're living in an apartment. And it's true that having a neighbor who is struggling with mental health issues or addiction is hard. But it's even harder to have that person shitting on the street out front of your apartment building because there's nowhere to go and everybody poops. And so this housing first approach, it's cheap. It's like much cheaper than like the ER bills for homeless people, than other associated costs, you know, the prices to things that happen to property values, the additional costs people incur for cleanup and whatever. It's just like in every way good. And LA has just like failed. But the novel before the novel that we were just talking about, which is called Red Team Blues, is in large part about homelessness in San Francisco, which is really something, even relative to Skid Row here. It's like nothing you've ever seen.
No, I go up there a lot. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's a stain on your soul. You see people living like that, especially in the shadow of just the unbelievable wealth of the Bay Area.
Yeah. The juxtaposition is pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
What is the next great scam that we need to be aware of?
Well, I think it's AI. I think that the thing that creative workers have been sucked into, and other kinds of workers too, is the belief that AI can do our jobs. What AI salesmen can do is convince our bosses that AI can do our jobs. And what our bosses are sort of convinced of is that they have monopolies, and so they don't actually have to replace us with AI that can do our jobs. They can just create like a kind of simulacrum of someone doing our jobs, that they can make shitty things and people will still pay.
Does it worry you that people will still pay for it, that the audience won't know the difference?
No, I think that what will happen is we'll have massive destruction of institutions and things people care about because it will fail. Like,
what do you think is the best thing AI can do for us?
There's plenty of things AI can do that's great, but it can only do it great.
I think it's altogether going to be a positive thing.
So in automation, there's this idea of a centaur, which is like the machine being run by the human, like a human head on a machine body, right? So like my Kia out there has got a thing where when I flip on the signal lights, if there's a car in my blind spot, it beeps, right? The machine is helping me by being vigilant in a way humans can't
Right,
be.
which we've talked about. We want things to make things easier for us.
So then there's the reverse, which is like being an Amazon driver, where the robot is watching your eyeballs, telling you where to drive, dinging you if you look the wrong way, or if you're going too slow, or if you're going too fast, or if you're not making quota, and you are the human doing the things the machine can't do. And that is the reverse centaur.
Were you ideological as a child?
Yeah, I was raised by, politically active people. My folks were both teachers, both Marxists, came out of a working class background. Both my dad and my mom were really the first people in their family to become literate. Literally, in the case of my father, neither of his parents could really read or write. My grandmother was inducted into the Red Army when she was 13 during the siege of Leningrad. My grandfather was like 16 when he left home. And so neither of them were particularly literate or whatever. My parents both got PhDs in education, became very politically active on campus, and taught public school all their lives, and were active in the teachers union and anti-nuclear proliferation. My dad was a computer scientist, so I was spent a lot of time with him thinking and talking about the political implications of computers, sort of a prelude to the life that I live now.
How do your politics impact the way you raise your daughter?
Well, if there's one thing I learned growing up with political parents, it's that, kids are going to ask political questions of you that if an adult were to ask them would seem like trolling, but kids are actually like legitimately, seriously interested. So I've been lucky enough to have moments, not every time, where she'll ask me a question, I'll go like, that is a really good question, let's talk about it for a bit. And to actually have that become a really sharp and interesting discussion. It actually started with Snowden. So Snowden came out in 2013, she was 5, and it was just a subject like my wife and I were talking about a lot. So we would be walking the kid to daycare or be going out at the weekend. She'd hear us talking and she'd ask about it. And so I had to explain it to her. And then over the years that followed, I explained it to her in more detail, right? She became more capable of understanding it. And, there's that Reddit meme, explain like I'm 5. Like I literally had to explain Snowden to a 5-year-old. And so...
how did you explain it?
Well, I said that the government wasn't allowed to spy on us, that the government had promised us that the only time they would spy on us is if they had a good reason to suspect us, and that it would be done in a way where a judge would have to listen to their reasons and make sure that the reasons were good, but that the government lied, and they spied not just on us, but on everyone in the world, and that they were using that spy information sometimes to just make guesses about who people were and whether they were good people or bad people, and that was secretly affecting people's lives. I think actually young kids get what it means to have big shadowy figures that are unaccountable, monitoring their conduct and making assessments about their character on the basis of benchmarks that they don't have any say over. So she got it.
Did you have a good time?
Sure, it was great.
You didn't have a good time?
No, it was great. I wasn't being sarcastic in the slightest.
Oh, okay.
It's a good firm handshake.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Do you guys need any books?